everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining us from all across the world. Welcome to Green Hope Foundation's webinar on the looming nuclear war. Where did we go wrong? My name is Kehkasha. I am the founder president of Green Hope Foundation, and I will be your moderator for this webinar. We have all seen throughout history how silence is often the greatest form of complicity. And this is abundantly relevant even today with regard to the nuclear disarmament process, where the majority of civil society, nations, and all other stakeholders have chosen to remain silent or have conveniently ignored it for their own vested interests, or simply out of sheer ignorance, assuming it to be a topic that does not concern them. Now, in the context of the Ukraine crisis, where a nuclear threat has already been verbalized, we have a cacophony of voices asking for de-escalation and remedial measures. But where was this concern even last year when the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons came into effect and the USA was trying its best to use its muscle to bully nations into not ratifying it? It is this ignorance and apathy of stakeholders that is at the root of the problem. Every individual, every institution, every entity for that matter must get involved now, because if we don't wake up now, it might just be too late. It is horrifying that we are even discussing the possibility of a nuclear war in this century when our past experiences have already shown us how catastrophic even one nuclear weapon can be. It is in this context that we are meeting today, bringing together an eminently erudite intergenerational panel to discuss the pathways of re-energizing and motivating actions, ones that engage a wider swathe of actors so that we can define milestones, objectives, and outcomes, so that never again in the future are we again confronted with the specter of nuclear annihilation. So on that note, I would like to invite our first speaker, the Honorable Douglas Roche, former Canadian Senator and author of Hope Not Fear, Building Peace in a Fractured World. Senator Roche, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. The Russian invasion of Ukraine, launching a catastrophic war with massive human suffering unseen since World War II, has brought the world to a turning point to pursue war or peace. The magnitude of this crisis cannot be overstated. The sudden realization that nuclear weapons could be used has shaken public confidence in security systems. The risk of nuclear war has never been higher. You ask, Kehkashan, where did the world go wrong in getting to this fraught moment? It went wrong in using the atomic bomb against Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It went wrong immediately after the horrendous first use in failing to construct international legal machinery to ban the development and possession of nuclear weapons. It went wrong when the major states built their military doctrines on the strategy of nuclear deterrence, which promised mutual assured destruction and led to a nuclear arms race. It went wrong in not enforcing the obligation under the Non-Proliferation Treaty to pursue comprehensive negotiations for the elimination of nuclear weapons. It went wrong when, after the Cold War, NATO, a nuclear-armed alliance, virtually encircled Russia. It went wrong when the nuclear states began their modernization programs, which steal money from the United Nations programs to build a human security agenda. Today's nuclear weapons crisis has many fathers. The political system is bogged down in casting blame. Several arms control treaties have been abandoned. There is no trust. The nuclear disarmament regime is in chaos. At the very moment when the world needs to pull together to deal with the COVID and climate crises, remilitarization of our societies is taking place. The only winners today are the military-industrial complex. So we must turn our attention immediately to what we are going to do to remove the specter of nuclear war. What must be our priorities? First, of course, must be to stop the madness of the Ukraine war. All world leaders must demand a diplomatic resolution of this conflict. The problem of nuclear weapons must be brought to the center of the political stage instead of being shunted off to the sidelines. The Ukraine war has shown how vital it is to maintain international machinery for peace. It is in everyone's interest to do so. The Non-Proliferation Treaty, shortly to be reviewed, must be strengthened. This can be done by reaffirming the commitment by all states parties to the full and effective implementation of Article 6 of the treaty and the unequivocal undertaking by the nuclear weapon states to accomplish the total elimination of their nuclear arsenals, leading to nuclear disarmament. The deterioration of nuclear disarmament in recent years must be overcome by a new commitment, as was agreed in 2010, to establish the necessary framework to achieve and maintain a world without nuclear weapons. This should include negotiations on a nuclear weapons convention or a framework of mutually reinforcing instruments backed by a strong system of verification. It is precisely because past commitments have been so blatantly ignored that the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons came into existence. In unequivocal language, the Prohibition Treaty declares that any use of nuclear weapons would be abhorrent to the principles of humanity and the dictates of public conscience. This historic treaty, now ratified by 60 states, exposes and stigmatizes nuclear weapons and their use as standing outside the norms of international humanitarian law. It challenges nuclear weapon states to finally act on their NPT commitments. The coming NPT review conference should acknowledge the value of the Prohibition Treaty. Out of this present crisis, we must seize a new opportunity to eliminate the deep evil of nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Roche. Absolutely, this is the opportunity for us to completely eliminate nuclear weapons. And thank you for elucidating all the multiple ways in which we as humanity went wrong with the first mistake, of course, using a nuclear weapon in the first place on Hiroshima. And it is so sad that, of course, during the pandemic, instead of coming together and moving towards peace, our world decided to continue with war. And therefore, it is imperative that as we rebuild better, we ensure that complete nuclear disarmament becomes a part of that agenda. So thank you once again. I shall now invite our next speaker, Ambassador Thomas Graham Jr., former Special Representative for U.S. President Clinton for Arms Control, Non-Proliferation, and Disarmament. Ambassador Graham, you have the floor. Ambassador Graham, if you can unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I did unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I want to say hello to Senator Roche. She's one of my heroes, and I always listen very close to everything that he says, and he just made an excellent speech, but a lot of it I don't agree with, but that doesn't diminish my respect for Senator Roche one bit. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me here, and Kekashan in particular, I thank you for inviting me here. Maybe I'll turn this light out. That's better. So I have a completely different take on all of this. I agree at the beginning that nuclear war is considerably more likely today than it was, say, 10 years ago. And that's because of one man and one man only. And his name is Vladimir Putin. He is the one who started this war. He is the one who introduced nuclear weapons. He is the one making nuclear threats. It's entirely his responsibility and no one else's. However, I will admit that the US enabled this to happen. At the end of the Cold War, the Soviet Union collapsed and left sizable nuclear arsenals on the territories of the four largest republics, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. And George H.W. Bush was determined that this, in his mind, regrettable event did not lead to additional nuclear weapon states. So it was agreed that Russia would be the successor state, nuclear weapon state to the Soviet Union, and the other three had to join the NPT as non-nuclear weapon states. And that was put down by President Bush as a condition of US recognition. Belarus and Kazakhstan quickly agreed, but Ukraine was extremely reluctant to give up the 5,000 nuclear weapons left on their territory, making them the third largest nuclear weapon state in the world. They thought they had to have those weapons being in Russia's neighborhood. And it took 2 years of negotiation to persuade them finally to give those weapons up. I participated in many of those discussions myself, and beginning with the first one in Kiev, when the Ukrainians told us that they were the France of the East, and France had nuclear weapons, and why shouldn't they? Especially having Russia as a neighbor. But finally, 2 years later, the president had changed. It was President Clinton now, but he felt the same way that President Bush did. about limiting the number of nuclear weapons and of nuclear weapon states, and protecting the NPT. I was asked to go speak to the Ukrainian parliament about the NPT in October of '94, and they were pretty far along at that point in signing on to all the Bush conditions. But then they insisted that if they were going to transfer all these weapons to Russia, then they had to have ironclad guarantees that their borders would be respected and guaranteed by relevant states. So at the OSCE summit in November 1994, Ukraine signed the NPT, agreeing to become a non-nuclear weapon state party and returning all the weapons, the 5,000 weapons, to Russia. And Ukraine, Russia, United Kingdom, and the US signed what was known as the Budapest Memorandum, in which the three other states guaranteed the borders of Ukraine, guaranteed, and said they would protect and defend the borders of Ukraine. This was a political document, and conversation at the beginning of this conflict was, well, the US has obligations to the NATO states under Article 5, but no obligations to Ukraine. Well, that is not true. The US said at the time that Budapest was signed that though this was a political document, they would respect it as though it were a treaty. And so years went by, and the US took no step to develop any potential protections for Ukraine. And then 2021 came along, and Russia began building large deployments of troops around the three of the four, three quarters of Ukraine. It was clear an invasion was coming, and still the US did nothing to stop the invasion by the introduction of US troops in Ukraine, which has been the only way to stop it. Large numbers. That would have stopped it. But we stayed out. And then when Putin did invade, we said, as did all the NATO states, said that we would not participate directly. We would support Ukraine with weapons and money, but we would not be directly involved because that would risk a nuclear war. That left Putin free to make all the nuclear threats he wanted to, and he made a major one on February 27th, and he sort of talked that way for another month. And so we have a situation where NATO is deterred and Russia is not. And that is not a situation that's going to work. Deterrence, which we're going to have, it's essential to have it, only works if both sides are deterred. And I will say that the outcome remains in doubt. It looks favorable to Ukraine. Their army has fought brilliantly and bravely and heroically, and they've made progress against Russia, but Russia has threatened them with nuclear weapons. And we don't know how that's going to come out. But I will say that if Russia is not defeated and severely punished, then a lot of states around the world in a similar situation to Ukraine, smaller states without nuclear weapons, where in which aggressors might be interested. There's a lot of states like that. Nuclear weapons are going to become very attractive. As was said in the Washington Post about a month ago, this is quite possibly the most the strongest blow against the continued strength of the NPT, and it's just going to make it much more difficult. That is, if Russia wins and is not punished for doing what they did, nuclear threats against a non-nuclear state. If they're not punished, then quite possibly the NPT will be severely damaged to the point of not holding together much longer. Now, it's unpredictable exactly what would happen, but certainly the outcome will be one we would not want. And so all our efforts right now, if we care about the NPT, and if we truly care about not having a nuclear war, we've got to set deterrence back on its feet, where Putin's actions have brought it into question, and countries may no longer be willing to is defeating Russia in Ukraine and setting the NPT back on its feet and adhering and strengthening the NPT over the years. All we have right now and for the foreseeable future is deterrence and the NPT, and we must protect both as vigorously as we can until someday war can be abolished, and then we can truly have disarmament.
Thank you, Tom. That was, thank you so much for outlining this. And yes, absolutely, for this war, there is only one man to blame. And you're absolutely right. If Russia is not severely punished for what it has done and what it is doing, that puts a lot of other smaller, vulnerable states around the world at risk of nuclear weapons, and which is why it is so important for us to ensure complete nuclear disarmament, so that it's not just 9 states who have nuclear weapons and can destroy the world with just a click of a button, but that everyone is safe from this threat. So thank you so much for outlining that. And with that, I will now invite our next speaker, Marilyn Turkovich, Executive Director of Charter for Compassion. Marilyn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kikishan. I'm overwhelmed with what I've just heard, and I'm sure that most people are, but I want to flip the coin for just a moment. A number of years ago, I worked on a huge project called Voices in Wartime. And a part of that project was listening to the voices of people, perhaps not the people that we're seeing on the news, who are being interviewed as they're crossing the border. But it was an opportunity to listen to the voices of writers. And one writer that struck me particularly was Anna Akhmatova from Russia. And I had done a lot of work on her writing prior to this project. I want to, if I can, recite just a few lines from What's War that she wrote. And she equated war to a plague. And so she asked the question, what's war? What's plague? We know that they will pass. Judgment is past. We see an end to them. But which of us can cope with this fear? This, the terror that is named the flight of time. So I was struck when Douglas was talking about what went wrong. And I was thinking what went wrong is when we started to accept sound bites for real news. And what went wrong almost 1,000 years ago, and then in particularly 600 years ago, when we decided that we could own all land and that people could own one another. And what went wrong after the wars when we allowed for people to barely scrape out a living. What went wrong was when we started to not be responsible for our neighbors. So now we're at a tipping point. We have that feeling of terror, that we don't know how to cope, that so much has happened to us, and that nuclear war is just another one of those flights that we're relying on others to take care of it. And we are blessed that we have people like Thomas in the arena of diplomacy. But what's going wrong is the voices of the people, not those who are struggling to stay alive and struggling to find a home, but the rest of us, not raising our voices, being in silence, because we really don't know necessarily what is it that we could do. Could the world somehow, even if it's one community in the world, and I know I'm speaking very smallly here, but if they decided that they were going to go without a meal for one day and all of that money would go to the people who are refugees on both sides, what would happen if neighborhoods took to the street and gave support to the fact that, you know, we can't continue like this? You know, I mean, I represent the Charter for Compassion, and when it was started and launched at the UN, Karen Armstrong, the founder, said, we don't have anything left. Diplomacy, we have tried. Sometimes diplomacy goes into a war game. So we have compassion, and that compassion is an extension of who we are and how we behave and how we take responsibility for other people. So yes, we are now relying on, again, the news. If it's national news, no matter what country, it's still a soundbite. If it's a dedicated news channel, then it's partial, more than likely. But how does it take account into providing us with ways, and when I say us, the common people, with ways to know that we do have responsibility here, and we have power to begin to voice our concerns. Looking forward to the conversation that's going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marilyn, for your remarks. Absolutely. We thank you once again for reiterating all of the ways that we went wrong as humanity. And absolutely, we did go wrong when we decided we could own our land, we could own people, we could not take care of our neighbors. And yes, as as has been highlighted, this is not a topic that a lot of people claim to have a lot of knowledge about, which, this veil of secrecy is one of the tools that a lot of institutions use to continue with the proliferation of nuclear weapons. So thank you very much for your remarks. And now I shall invite our next speaker, Bruce Knott, President and CEO of the NGO Committee on Disarmament, Peace, and Security, to give his remarks. Bruce, over to you.
Thank you so much. This has been a very rich and wonderful conversation, tragic conversation. Many adjectives could be put to this. I hope to add some different insights and maybe eliminate or even in some cases contradict some of the former speakers. And like some of the others, I will start with 1945, which was before I was born. And the United States did not need to drop bombs on Japan. Japan had already sued for peace. The only condition they had was that they wanted to keep the emperor, which the United States in the end did. And so that concession for peace and for not causing such great harm to so many people was a doable concession, and we didn't do it, and we destroyed 2 cities. And most of us have seen the photographs and film of the cities that were destroyed. There are other photographs and other film that most of us have not seen, and that's the destruction to the people, the terrible radiation poisoning that they suffered, the flesh coming off their bones, just awful things that were not, people in America did not see these photos or these films in 1945. They do exist, they can be accessed now, but even today, most people have not seen this. And I really appreciated Marilyn telling us about sound bites. We were not informed in 1945, and we're still not being informed of what's really going on and what's really happening. When I was 13 years old, there was the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I remember it vividly. And I remember, like all the other children, going under my desk, duck and cover in case of nuclear weapons. And of course, ducking under your desk at school was not going to protect anybody from a nuclear detonation. We were really afraid at that time that we would have nuclear war. President Kennedy was the American president. Nikita Khrushchev was the head of the Soviet Union. And in the end, they were reasonable people, and they pulled back, and we did not have a nuclear war. We've mentioned that there's one person responsible, Vladimir Putin, for the current crisis. I would add another name, and the other name is Donald Trump. And when he was president, particularly in the last days when he was president, the time after the insurrection on January 6th until January 20th, when Joe Biden took the oath of office as the president, the Pentagon was terrified. And they really thought that Trump, in his manifold efforts to steal the election and to remain in office, would start a nuclear war. And they, of course, as military officers in the US military, were obligated to launch nuclear weapons if ordered to do so by the president. And they were trying to come up with strategies where they could avoid that. And they said if one general was ordered, he would resign. And then another general would have to come up, and that general would resign. And they would be able to delay the decision of starting a nuclear war until Joe Biden was inaugurated and Trump was no longer in office. So you're talking about 2 people who were unhinged. And one of them was the US president. And we could have that happen to us again. Putin also seems to be quite unstable. And the fact that he has his finger on the nuclear button is frightening. It is terrifying. And he has made threats. He has said that, you know, he would use nuclear weapons if Russia were threatened. So we are in a really bad situation. For most of my life, I believe that the leaders of the world were sensible enough and decent enough that they wouldn't allow this to happen. We have two very serious examples, one with Donald Trump, the US president, and one with Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, who have shown themselves to be unstable and unreliable and dangerous. And so this faith in our leaders, it doesn't exist anymore. It's not there. I want to, I also say, I agree with the other speakers that we definitely should implement the TPNW. We need to eliminate nuclear weapons altogether. What's happening in Ukraine, and I'm disturbed with, you know, talking about security guarantees for Ukraine. And as Ambassador Graham mentioned in his remarks, they already had security guarantees. Russia, the United States, Britain have all guaranteed Ukraine's independence and sovereignty. And we followed, we have not kept up with that commitment. And now Vladimir Zelensky has said he will give up membership with NATO for security guarantees and end this war with Russia. But he already has security guarantees, and he's asking for the skies to close. That's what he keeps saying. He wants a no-fly zone over Ukraine, and we owe that to him. We're not doing it. All the NATO nations are not doing it because they're afraid of nuclear weapons, which means any country with nuclear weapons can stop us from protecting another nation that we have committed ourselves to protecting. And that is a dangerous thing to happen. It means that any rogue state, any perverted state can stop the entire world from doing what it needs to do to protect the peace of the world because they have nuclear weapons. And there are a lot of examples. You know, we're looking at Russia right now. The other examples that frighten me are Israel and Iran. They are poised to have nuclear war. India, Pakistan also have nuclear weapons and have fought wars in the past. North Korea and just about anybody else, but North Korea maybe in the United States is a very dangerous combination. So there are lots of combinations of countries that have nuclear weapons, which can cause us a great deal of havoc. And they're not necessarily governed by sensible people. It's no longer John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev. We've got people that are really quite unstable, and they have their hands on the nuclear button. I have had some conversation. I'm part of the interfaith working group on disarmament, and we've had conversations with the people in the White House. And one of the things that I asked was, first of all, the United States needs to have a no first use policy. We need to commit ourselves that we will not be the first country to use nuclear weapons. And so far, we have refused to do that. Russia had a no first use policy, and they have rescinded it. So now they do not have a no first use policy. And China does have a no first use policy. I don't know if they would live up to that or not, but they at least have it. And they should be commended for at least stating that they will not be the first to use nuclear weapons. The other thing that bothers me, and I mentioned this to the official from the White House, is that no one person, no one man, and it's always a man, it's never a woman, no one man should have the ability to start nuclear war. And the situation, the fear the Pentagon had with Trump never should happen. No one man should have that power to push a button and start a nuclear war. He must consult somebody else. Maybe the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the Pentagon, Congress, somebody. that power should not rest in the hands of one person. So again, I said this to the White House official, and he said, yes, we are discussing both of these things, and it's up to President Biden to decide. And I like President Biden. I have confidence in President Biden. I know he's not going to start a nuclear war. But if he doesn't use his power to change the policy of the United States while he's in office, we're not sure the next guy isn't going to be some kind of nut basket. So, you know, he needs to have a policy of no first use, and also to have a policy that no one person has the ability to start a nuclear war. And I'm talking about starting a nuclear war. If we are attacked, then that's a different set. Now, morally, personally, I would say if missiles were on their way to the United States, we should not retaliate, because having one half of the world destroyed doesn't give us the justification to destroy the other half of the world. But that's a very difficult moral decision, and I'm not putting that on anybody right now. But that, to me, that's the moral thing to do. It is not to retaliate in order to destroy more of the world than is already being destroyed. But that argues with Ambassador Graham's deterrence, and I understand deterrence, but and I'm not asking the United States to do that. Lastly, I want to say a word about NATO, because I've heard a lot about the United States has pushed the borders of NATO right up to the Russian border, and that's why they're upset. We didn't push the borders of NATO to the borders of Russia. The countries that have left the Soviet Union, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine, all these other countries, Romania, they begged to be in NATO because they know what Russia was going to do. They have lived under Russian and Soviet domination for centuries, and they desperately wanted to be part of NATO. We didn't push NATO to the borders of the Soviet Union or to Russia. The countries that left the Soviet Union joined NATO for their own protection. And we're seeing right now in Ukraine why they did that. They want that protection, and actually Ukraine deserves that protection. And I've looked at the Budapest Agreement, and it seems to me very clear that we have an obligation to give Ukraine more than we're giving them now. And basically, we need to give them the safe airspace. They're taking care of the fighting on the ground. If we can secure the airspace and prevent the bombing and the missile attacks, then that would be great. One last thing on this point. I have a lot of Jewish friends who are really upset with Israel because Israel has what they call the Iron Dome technology, which protects Israel from missile attacks from Hamas and other groups. And Ukraine has asked for that technology. And we have a Jewish president of Ukraine. And why Israel will not provide this Iron Dome technology to Ukraine to protect Ukraine, none of my friends and I just don't understand why they won't do that, because that's what Ukraine desperately needs. But bottom line, the last thing I'm going to say is we've got to abolish nuclear weapons. We've got to get rid of all of them for all of us. We are all in danger as long as these terrible weapons exist, and we need to push hard. And it means all of us being active and pushing our governments to get rid of nuclear weapons entirely, because we are all in serious danger, and the danger is only going to get worse over time. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Bruce. And absolutely, a nuclear war can never be won, and therefore it must never be fought. And you are right. It is so sad that we grow up thinking that our leaders are going to be the ones who are going to protect our countries, protect humanity. But in the recent years, we have seen that there are, as you said, a lot of unstable people in power, and these are the men who have access to these nuclear weapons and can literally destroy our world with just that press of a button. So until and unless we achieve complete nuclear disarmament, we as humanity are all at risk. So Thank you so much for highlighting that. And now I shall invite our next panelist, Cynthia Lazarov, award-winning documentary filmmaker and founder of Women Transforming Our Nuclear Legacy. Cynthia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kekasha. I'm so honored to be here with you and in the company of all my extraordinary fellow panelists. I've been deeply moved by each and all of you. So much to think about in this incredibly dangerous moment. So, Kekasha, you asked me to speak about my experiences of the Hawaii false alarm and the current threat of nuclear war. So I want to begin by sharing my screen. So when the Cold War came to an end, I stopped worrying about nuclear war. All of that changed for me in 2017 when I was producing this film. And I interviewed dozens of the world's top experts in the US and Russia on nuclear dangers. And pretty much everyone I spoke to awakened me to today's staggering nuclear danger. The two who had the greatest impact on me were our former US Secretary of Defense, William Perry, and former Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev. Secretary Perry said to me that today the danger of some sort of a nuclear catastrophe is greater than it was during the Cold War, and most people are blissfully unaware of this danger. And then he said, so we're allowing ourselves to sleepwalk into a nuclear catastrophe. We must wake up. For me, at that moment, I realized that I'd been sleepwalking since the end of the Cold War. I came home from those interviews in December of 2017 at the height of the fire and fury between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. And in Hawaii, nuclear tensions were particularly high because we knew that we had been marked as a target on Pyongyang's map of nuclear death. We were getting instructions from our government about how to prepare for a nuclear attack and how to survive a nuclear attack. So all of this was present for me on the morning of January 13th, 2018, when we all got this message on our cell phones here in Hawaii, over 1 million of us, ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii, seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. So at first it was, is this real? And so we started to call 911, but we couldn't get through because everyone was calling 911. And then my partner said, well, I don't know if this is real or not, but I'm going to get the girls. Our 2 younger daughters were 7 miles away in the town of Kapa'a. And as he was going out the door, I said, wait a second. We need a plan if it is real. I don't want to be separated. And he said, call me from the car and call me in the car and we'll figure it out. So he was out the door and I stood there dazed and I thought, who do I know who's going to know? And I immediately thought of my friend, Felicia Cowden, who's a journalist, and she knows everything. And so I started calling her, I texted her, I left a message, I checked her Facebook page, nothing. And after what seemed like an eternity, she called me back and she said, Cynthia, the county's telling us to take shelter. And for me, that meant they're our government here. So that was, okay, this is real. I have to take this seriously, my God. And so the first question was, where do you go? And there are no designated nuclear shelters in the state of Hawaii. So we decided to shelter in a meditation cave on a neighbor's property because it was the most sealed environment that we could think of that we knew that we could get to pretty quickly. And then it was, well, what do I take with me? And I looked at my phone here, it had 12% charge. And I thought, what am I going to do? And then I thought, well, I think there's electricity in the cave. So I grabbed a bag and I threw my phone charger, my computer charger, my purse, my passport, and then this shawl to wrap around my face in case of radiation, and then leggings for the same reason. And then I thought, food and water. I've done nothing to prepare my family for this. We had been instructed to have a gallon of water per day for 14 days for each person, and enough food, canned food, for 14 days. And I looked on the shelf and I had 2 small bottles of water. I threw them in my bag, and then a bunch of bananas on the counter. And then I rushed to the car. Even though the cave is only a few minutes away, we didn't know how many minutes we had. So I started driving, and it was only at that moment that I allowed myself to think of my eldest daughter in Los Angeles. She just left a few days before, and I thought, I've got to call her. I've got to say goodbye. And the phone was ringing and ringing, and I couldn't get through. She wasn't picking up. I have bad cell service here in the area. And I parked the car, and I was running to the steps to the cave. And finally, when I got to the foot of the steps of the cave, she picked up. And I said, Mackenzie, I don't know if you have heard, but we've all gotten a message on our cell phones that we're going to be hit by a ballistic missile, and we're going to shelter in the cave, and I'll call you again from the cave if I can, but I just want you to know I love you. And she said, Mom, I love you too. And at that moment, time stopped for me. I stood there frozen. I didn't want to let her go. I didn't know if I was ever going to hear her voice again. And I thought, wait a second, what if this isn't one nuclear missile from North Korea, which would be horrific enough, but what if this is many nuclear missiles coming from Russia to us and many from us going back to them? What if this is the beginning of one of those accidental nuclear wars that Secretary Perry and so many of the experts I interviewed for the film are also worried about? What if this is the beginning of the end of life as we know it, of everything and everyone we know and love and cherish on this earth? And then I heard, Mom, go, go. And so Mackenzie jolted me out of that, and I said, I love you. And I ran up the steps to the cave. And just as I got to the door and went to open it, it opened. And it was my neighbor, Colleen, and she was smiling. And she said, it was a false alarm. It took 38 minutes for our government to send out a message on our cell phones that it was a false alarm. But even with everything that I knew about nuclear weapons, nuclear war was unimaginable to me until I went through those 38 minutes. And now this experience lives inside of me as a mother, as a human being, and it's never going to go away until we eliminate nuclear weapons. So that brings us, and that's why I'm here today, and that's why I do this work, which brings me around now to Ukraine and the current nuclear danger. So we're in a moment, as we've all heard and talked about, of extremely high tensions, in some ways more dangerous than the Cuban Missile Crisis. And as we move into the second month of the war, I'm most concerned about two things. First, we have to find our way to a ceasefire to stop the killing, the bloodshed, and the immense human suffering. And I'm deeply concerned about the risk of escalation that could lead to a nuclear exchange. We have both state and non-state actors who could take action that could escalate the conflict inadvertently or intentionally. We have large numbers of NATO and Russian troops in close proximity now in the region, and this multiplies the risk of possible incidents of escalation. And we have uncertainty about the red lines for NATO and for Russia. There are so many pathways to escalation in this fog of war, any one of which could trigger a spiral up the escalatory ladder to a potentially catastrophic nuclear confrontation. I highly recommend looking at two hypothetical escalatory scenarios, one published by the Nuclear Threat Initiative and the other a video simulation done by Princeton that starts with a warning launch of one nuclear weapon by Russia during a conventional conflict and escalates to a nuclear war with 90 million dead and injured within the first few hours. And this is just within the first few hours, and I'll put those in the chat. We have to end this war to make sure that we don't have an escalation that could lead to something like this. We need to reduce the risk of escalation, and we need to prioritize diplomacy, dialogue, and negotiations to secure a ceasefire, the withdrawal of Russian troops, and to work out all the details of a peace agreement. To achieve this, we need better and more open channels of communication at all levels, diplomatic and military. Nuclear risk never goes away. It's omnicidal behavior to stop talking to your nuclear adversary. And words matter. We need to stop the inflammatory and escalatory rhetoric on all sides. This is a planetary nuclear wake-up call. The only way to prevent one person or 9 nuclear-armed countries from holding the world hostage and unleashing nuclear Armageddon is to abolish, eliminate, and ban nuclear weapons forever. If we survive this, we will have another chance to get this right and move as quickly as possible toward the total elimination of nuclear weapons. It's a moral and existential imperative to support the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, as we've heard from everyone here today. As the calls for more weapons and more defense spending rise across the US, Canada, and Europe, I have no illusions about the formidable obstacles in the way of achieving this. Our work in the peace and nuclear abolition movements may be harder now, but if we stand together, it'll be easier. Dmitry Muratov, editor-in-chief of Russia's independent newspaper Novaya Gazeta, who won the Nobel Peace Prize last fall, has called for us to stand together for peace and the abolition of nuclear weapons. He said, only a global anti-war movement can save life on this planet. So I call for us to stand with Dmitry and build this movement together. It's really about coming together to act out of love, not fear, love for our beloved loved ones, love for our beloved Earth, and love for all we hold dear. Our work is now more important than ever. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Thank you for sharing your experiences. And like from what we could hear, personally, I felt traumatized listening to it. And I can just imagine how you and the residents of how I felt when just getting that message on your phone. And it's just so horrific. No one should have to go through that. And you're absolutely right. Every single moment that we have nuclear weapons poses a risk for escalation. And again, the only way that we can remove this risk is by removing and abolishing all nuclear weapons. And of course, what we have seen now is that we have a lot of our world leaders, a lot of our male world leaders using a lot of this kind of inflammatory language, as you said, kind of threatening one another. And that is really not going to work, because we need to take every single step that we can towards peace and not just issuing threats to one another. It has to be about this common peace for our common humanity. So thank you so much for highlighting that. And now I shall invite our next panelist, Pragna Vasubal, member of the Board of Directors and Head of Events of Green Hope Foundation. Pragna, over to you.
Thank you so much, Kakasha. It has been such an honor to be part of this eminent panel with such distinguished panelists. It has been such an enlightening discussion, and I hope to bring a new perspective to the panel. Of course, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine on February 24th, we realized that the threat of nuclear war never really went away. It just became visible. Russia has the largest nuclear arsenal with roughly 6,000 nuclear warheads. As North Korea continues to accumulate nuclear weapons, India and Pakistan appear to be engaged in an arms race to develop short-range tactical nuclear weapons. And hostility between the United States, Russia, and China continues to escalate. The total number of weapons has dropped by about 80% since the end of the Cold War, from an estimated 70,300 in 1986 to 12,700 in early 2022. Over the past 2 decades, the pace of reduction has slowed and appears to be sustained only by the dismantlement of retired weapons. In contrast to overall nuclear weapons, the number of warheads in global military stockpiles, which includes usable weapons, has dramatically increased. This is the harsh and frightening reality that we currently live in. As of now, we may have fewer nuclear warheads, but more countries possess them. This is fueled by a sort of domino effect, which was well explained by Ambassador Graham. A country is forced to keep up with the trend to match its rivals. This is such a dangerous act. The false presumption that nuclear weapons instill a sense of security is what clouds the judgment of many governments. Nuclear weapons are not the solution to achieving security. In fact, they are a menace, especially if they are left in the hands of unstable global leaders. This point was eloquently explained by Bruce Knotts, which reminded me of a quote by the famous author Yuval Noah Harari. It takes a lot of wise people to make peace, but it is sometimes enough to have one fool to have a war. This begs us the question, where did we go wrong? For the most part, the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty was strikingly successful. But with the context of the changing global scenario, stricter implementation of non-proliferative laws must take place. And as representatives of civil society, we need to demand greater accountability from these nations. But it is important to realize and emphasize that nuclear proliferation is not the problem. The problem is nuclear weapons itself. As long as they exist, even if in fewer numbers, there is always a threat that they will be used. Nuclear weapons breed extensive centralization of political control and obsessive secrecy, undermining democratic accountability. There is also the added risk of accidental detonation by security breach, system malfunctions, and even human errors. Hence, to reiterate what the other panelists said, the only solution is complete nuclear disarmament and not just nuclear non-proliferation. This will require tremendous efforts, and therefore, we need to ensure stricter compliance through effective and credible inspection and verification of the Prohibition Treaty. The nuclear disarmament issue directly impedes the progress of the Sustainable Development Goals, and it needs all sections of civil society to come together to make disarmament a top action priority. Strategic partnerships between governments, international organizations, and civil society, especially the youth, are imperative in achieving a nuclear arms-free world. Many young people feel that nuclear disarmament is not the most pressing issue or feel helpless in this matter right now. And this is where I believe young people can make a difference by using our biggest superpower, social media. I believe that we can use the power of social media to educate and dismantle the cloak of secrecy surrounding the topic of nuclear proliferation. This is the essence of our work at Green Hope Foundation. We, the future generations, play an integral role in this movement. And we at Green Hope Foundation believe that in this modern age, knowledge is power. We spread awareness through our peace and disarmament education and engage with youth around the world to echo our call for, we want books, not nukes. We encourage youth to foster peace through art, music, dance, and drama, and through simple acts such as planting trees. We mobilize young people through our workshops, our webinars, and our debates involving subject matter experts. Not only do we do work at a grassroots level, we also amplify our demands through active interventions at high-level political forums, since it is about time that youth too have a seat at the table. Thus, I believe that by truly achieving intergenerational solidarity and ensuring cross-generational dialogue and collaboration, we can get a step closer to our goal of a nuclear arms-free world. Nuclear disarmament and peace education should be made mandatory in schools to make the youth realize their huge role and responsibility in this movement. We owe it to ourselves and future generations to mitigate this problem of nuclear proliferation within our lifetimes. Millions of families are still reeling from the losses of their loved ones during the nuclear bombings of 1945. Hiroshima and Nagasaki are not merely names of Japanese cities. They are the symbol of nuclear destructiveness and the symbol of hope and peace. They represent human strength and the indomitable spirit. The world needs to recall the experiences of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings in order to unite to end the nuclear weapons threat to humanity and all of life. We should not have to wait for another nuclear explosion to realize its consequence and finally start acting proactively on the situation. Because further procrastination can only have catastrophic consequences. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pragna. Absolutely, what you started your remarks with, it's so powerful that the Russian invasion of Ukraine just proved that we had this threat of nuclear war all along. It never went away. The only thing that did happen is that it became more visible. And you also reiterated how we have all of these other nuclear nations, testing their weapons, trying to keep up with one another, which is just so harmful for humanity. And of course, we as young people have a lot of power to bring about this change, help put the world on the path to complete nuclear disarmament. So it is absolutely imperative that we all come together through our common humanity to ensure complete and total nuclear disarmament. So thank you very much. And with that, I would like to thank all of our speakers for this dialogue. It's such an important dialogue. It's such an important discussion that needs to be had. And we're very glad that we've been able to bring together experts really in this nuclear disarmament movement, people who've been working in this field for a very, very long time together to discuss this topic. So I see that we do have questions from the audience. I see that we have some raised hands. So what I will be doing is promoting these attendees to panelists, and then they would be able to take the floor. So the first person that I'll give the floor to is Anshita Hegde. So Anshita, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone, I'm Anshita Hegde from India. Thank you panelists for such an insightful discussion. My question is, why is the discussion on nuclear issues so elitist? And is this done on purpose?
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so in accordance with time, I think we will take the 3 questions and then we'll ensure that then we'll give the floor to our panelists. Okay, so the next person on my list is Aliyu. Aliyu, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Professor Sun, and thank you to all of our panelists for such an insightful and hope-driven presentation. So my question is basically diving into the topic of the center of our discussion today, which have been to ask, where have we gone wrong? So my question is, was it the formation of nuclear arsenal was one of the main steps of the road that world superpower has ever taken? Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Aliyu. And finally, Dyuti, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dyuti Vaswal from the United Arab Emirates. I would like to thank all the panelists for such an amazing discussion. And my question is for all the panelists. Often the loss to biodiversity is ignored when discussing nuclear fallouts. How can we magnify this aspect?
Thank you very much, Dyuti, and thank you to all of our to our audience for their questions. Okay, so the floor is open. Panelists, yes, Senator Roche, I see your raised hand. You're on mute.
Thank you, and congratulations to all the panelists for their contributions to this stimulating discussion. And I'll try to address the 3 questions. I interpret the 3 questions as sort of a call for nuclear action. And in this respect, I want to focus on the remarks of Ambassador Graham, my good friend, Tom Graham, to whom I pay great respect today. I know intensely what Tom has done to save the Non-Proliferation Treaty, particularly in the crucial year of 2000. And we are bringing different perspectives today with respect to saving the NPT in this new crisis that we're in. But there is one common bond that holds the remarks of myself and Ambassador Graham together, and that is that it is essential to save the integrity and work of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, particularly as it's now under assault by the deterioration of the nuclear disarmament agenda. So if Tom Graham is advocating a strengthening of deterrence in order to save the NPT, and I would have to respectfully disagree with that and say that what is essential to save the NPT is stronger work for the abolition of nuclear weapons. In the year 2000, that crucial year, the United States and Tom Graham worked especially hard to get a successful conclusion of that conference in which all states, including the United States, all states made an unequivocal undertaking to the total elimination of nuclear weapons by a program of 13 practical steps. That began to fall apart in later years. But that commitment was reaffirmed in the year 2010. And in the year 2010, they agreed to establish the necessary framework to achieve and maintain a world without nuclear weapons. So I'm repeating here that we have had success in bringing states together in difficult times. And this must be repeated today. Earlier this year, the P5 permanent members of the Security Council did reaffirm that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. So there is a basis on which to build. And I believe that the framework to establish comprehensive negotiations as called for under Article 6 of the treaty now should be advanced. And it is precisely because the world is so dangerous that we have to reaffirm, recommit, and reenact the development of a framework that will support the constant reduction and elimination of nuclear weapons.
Great. Thank you so much, Senator Roche. I see that Bruce has his hand raised. So Bruce, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I actually didn't understand all three of the questions, so I apologize for that. The one question I would like to address is Anshita's question about why is it just elite folks that are talking about this. I have the same question. Why is it, older white people like ourselves that are mostly talking about these issues? What's wrong with the young people? I look at TikTok, I look at Instagram, I look at Twitter, I look at Facebook. I don't see anybody posting anything about nuclear weapons. And so I turn the question back to the young people. Why are you not discussing this? Why are you not bringing this issue up? Why is it you don't care about this issue? Use your social media power. And we heard that from the last speaker. You do have social media power. Bring this into all of your forms of communication and let the world know that you don't want nuclear weapons, that nuclear weapons don't make us safer, and it's a danger to all of us. Otherwise, you're going to have these discussions from older white people because we have seen it. We lived it through situations like Cynthia's talk about the false alert in Hawaii, where she thought there was nuclear war upon us. When I was ducking at 13 years old under my desk because I thought the Russians were going to attack us during the Cuban Missile Crisis, we have that fear kind of built into us because we've been living with it for so long. And my feeling is that this generation is not taking this seriously. They seem to be distracted by it. And there's so many other things to be distracted by. There's a lot of stuff out there. Will Smith slapping Chris Rock. I mean, I am so tired of hearing about that. It is not important. We have school shootings. We have terrible things going on. And the news media is full of Will Smith slapping Chris Rock as if that's the most consequential event of the modern era. It's not. It's trivial, it's whatever it is, but it's not that important. So why are we getting so wound up over trivialities when the entire world faces destruction? So I really hope that everybody will use all of their social media to discuss these issues, not Will Smith, but these issues about life and death for our planet, because that's what's important.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Bruce. And for our panelists, I am just posting the questions in the chat so that it is slightly easier. I see Tom has a raised hand. So Tom, the floor is yours. Yes, Tom. Yes. You're on mute.
First, I'd like to respond to my good friend, Doug Roche. I want to make it clear, Doug, I am a strong believer in deterrence. As long as we have nuclear weapons, we have to have deterrence. If we can get rid of nuclear weapons, of course, you don't need deterrence anymore. But I think that the chances of getting rid of nuclear weapons has always been very low. And now, in the wake of Ukraine, if Russia isn't truly penalized for this in a major way, countries are going to say, well, we all better get nuclear weapons. Somebody might threaten to invade us. It's a dramatic demonstration of the utility of nuclear weapons is the way it looks right now. And that impression has to be dissipated before we can even get back to where we were on nuclear weapons. And the third thing I would say is that in my way of looking at things, we need to get rid of war, and then we can get rid of the weapons. If we get rid of the weapons, that is nuclear weapons, first, we're just going to have World War II. So it's not a solution just to get rid of nuclear weapons. You have to get rid of major military deployments and arsenals. Gorbachev, for example, says Russia will not eliminate nuclear weapons until their army is the size of the United States. And so I think really the most important thing is to focus on how to eliminate war, major war anyway, and then get rid of, then eliminating nuclear weapons becomes possible. I'd just like to make a couple of comments on what Mr. Knotts has said both times. First, sir, I want to say I totally agree with you on the influence of Donald Trump. And I would say with respect to security arrangements, yes, Ukraine has security arrangements. They had them back in when they gave up their weapons to begin with, but they weren't observed. They might as well not have had them. You can't, security arrangements aren't much good if the people that signed them don't intend to back up their words with action where it's required. And I ask the same question you asked about young people. There's on social media, I mean, I'm not a devotee of social media, but I do use it somewhat. And it's amazing how trivial most of the discussions on it are. And I'd like to see more commitment by young people to these causes, not just nuclear weapons, but climate change also. Okay.
Thank you very much, Bruce. And yes, I see that there are some things in the chat, and I see Cynthia's hand raised. So yes, Cynthia, the floor is yours.
Well, these are all really important questions for right now in this moment. And the discussions about youth on social media are also something that I want to touch on. I think that, you know, I want to come back to the first on Chita's question about elites. And I think that it touches on something that Kekishan mentioned about this veil of secrecy. You know, we think that nuclear weapons belong to the experts and they belong to the leaders, that it's their domain, that there's nothing we can do. There's this sense of that we don't have the agency, but we do have the agency. If nuclear weapons can destroy all of us, we all have a role to play in eliminating them. And so we have to realize that our lives are at stake and claim our seats at the table to take action. It's really going to take a global movement, a global disarmament movement like we had in the 1980s, which is when I came of age. So I think that one thing that we can look at, and this addresses the concern of biodiversity, and Tom just mentioned climate change as well, is that there's been a lot of attention on social media to climate change, but there's such an intersectionality on these issues. So I think intersectionality is a way into engaging people of all ages on this issue, whether it's biodiversity, whether it's climate change. And I think where there's a nexus, a very obvious nexus in this war that's going on, which is that the people who are profiting from this war are the military industrial complex. Their profits are skyrocketing, and also the fossil fuel industry is profiting. And so there is a divestment movement that's very strong for against fossil fuels, and there's also one for that's tied to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons that ICANN and Don't Bank on the Bomb have been putting forward. And if one goes to look at the biggest offender banks funding nuclear weapons and fossil fuels, many of them are the same. So this is a bridge where our movements can come together. And I think we have to bring all of us together, because pretty much nuclear weapons are connected to every issue that we care about. We don't have the money for things that we need, or we're told we don't have the money for things that are being spent on weapons and on war. To address Tom's concern, I think we do have to get rid of war. You know, that's such an important thing. So I think there is hope right now, and I am seeing more young people because of Ukraine, so many more. And I'm going to put, there was a journalist from New York Magazine, a young millennial, who is for the first time experiencing nuclear anxiety. And she wrote what to do with her nuclear anxiety from a millennial's perspective. So I'm going to put that in the chat as well right now. So I actually have hope that this can be a moment, this is a moment to seize, where we can see how everything is connected and take action together.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Pragna, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kaksha. And I would like to respond to Bruce's question about young people not caring about nuclear war. As I mentioned, disarmament education is something that is often seen as a taboo topic, especially for young people. And sadly, even those who are aware do not feel that it is an immediate threat, because we are not really educated about what could happen in the face of a nuclear war. So from our experience at Green Hope Foundation, and as Ms. Cynthia mentioned, we have seen that it is beneficial to find intersections between nuclear disarmament, peace, and other topics such as biodiversity conservation to make the issue more real to us. This leads me to answer the question about the loss of biodiversity in the face of nuclear war. With greater disarmament education, as we are imparting, we can raise awareness about the fact that nuclear weapons will literally destroy everything on our planet, including our biodiversity.
Thank you, Pragna. Marilyn, do you have any remarks?
I was sitting here, I wrote that I would love to hear from the people who asked the questions, what their thoughts are at this point. Certainly, we have very little time. So what is it that we could do to educate one another? I think that we're all in amnesia. I was under the desk at the same time with the nuclear threat that we had when we were young. And I know Fire Next Time, the stories, the forgotten stories of Hiroshima is so powerful. And wouldn't it be an incredible thing if just as happened on 9/11, that all major TV stations just broadcast, not a telethon, but an endless education program so that we could understand what we have forgotten or what we don't know. So I'd really like to turn this over to the questionnaires.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And yes, just before, yes, I see a raised hand from Thomas. Tom, the floor is yours. You're on mute.
Sorry. I just wanted to make a quick comment on education. It's just crucial. Americans are not educated the way in the depth that they should be. I mean, for example, everybody's worried about Ukraine and the war and the impact it'll have and nuclear war and all that. Does anybody know how many people would you guess know what the Budapest Memorandum was? Not too many, I suspect. At least that's my experience. That's just part of your education. That happened 30 years ago. That should be that should be part of the things that people learn before they get involved, or at least as they're getting involved in these issues. So education for this subject, like every other subject, is everything.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I am cognizant of time. And actually, Tom, you mentioned the Budapest memo, and we did have a question that actually referred to that and asked if in this regard, would it be a good idea at some time to advocate Ukraine to become a WMD-free zone? And is this a way to refocus on the goal in these chaotic moments, or a distraction? So being cognizant of time, I would ask all of our panelists if they would like to respond to that in their concluding remarks, and just go from there. So we will go in the same order of speakers. So the first person I would give the floor to is Senator Roche.
Yes, I do think that Ukraine would make a great contribution out of the suffering that it's happening now. If it could respond by making it a clear declaration that it will be a nuclear weapons-free zone, I think this would inspire much of the world in the way that their courage is reinforcing us. Finally, I want to say that nuclear weapons cannot be abolished in a vacuum. We need a human security agenda that is comprised of the elements that have been brought so sharply into focus in the Secretary General, the UN Secretary General's our common agenda document, in which the interplay of the issues of arms control and disarmament, economic and social development, environmental protection, and advancement of human rights are all advanced in a common way. That is what we're learning out of the COVID. We're learning it out of the climate. And now this threat to nuclear is bringing us together as human beings. And some have said this discussion has been perhaps too elitist. Well, we do have to address the formalities of how nuclear disarmament can occur. And the Non-Proliferation Treaty is the centerpiece of that. And that has got to be saved as in its review conference, which is coming up. But I repeat, we need a larger agenda of humanity caring about survival on this one planet. That is what this subject is really all about.
Thank you so much, Senator Roche. Ambassador Graham?
The question is, could Ukraine be a neutral, as I heard the question? Is that correct?
Yes, it's,
Ukraine has already offered to be a neutral. The President Zelensky has offered it several times. And I think that the proper outcome of all this, if you could wave a magic wand, would be a neutral and secure Ukraine, secure by guarantees which will be observed. Russia, all its troops back in Russia, and Russia pays for the destruction they caused in Ukraine. It currently stands at 83 billion. And that might be a proper penalty for all the damage they've done, or maybe it should be more than that, but it should be at least that.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Graham. Marilyn, you're on mute.
Apologies. I totally agree with what's been said, and I'm hoping that we can invite everyone who's here to the United Religions Initiative's Voices for a Nuclear-Free World. And I think that if you are interested in knowing more about that group, that's Kikishan and Thomas and myself are involved in the group. We need all the help we can get, and also an invitation to let the folks, all of us at the Charter, know how we can continue this discussion and really help with the education part of it along with Hope. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. Okay, so next, Bruce, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kakashan and Green Hope for sponsoring this. It's been a really rich discussion. I'm going to end with more critical remarks. I think we all suffer from attention deficit disorder and compassion deficit disorder. And by that, I mean, you know, we are looking very much at Ukraine and they deserve all of our compassion and attention. But at the same time, Ukraine and Russia produce more grain and oils than any other countries. And the World Food Program now is solely without enough food for Yemen. They have cut the rations in Yemen by 50% because they can't get enough food. This is already impacting countries in Africa and around the world because both these countries are major grain exporters. And now that they're in war, that grain is not being produced and not being shipped. And so while we're looking at Ukrainian refugees, and we have a lot of compassion for them, and we should have a lot of compassion for them, there are 1.47 million Syrian refugees that have also been bombed by Russia that we've forgotten. There are refugees coming out of Tigray and Ethiopia and many other parts of the world, Afghanistan, and somehow our compassion has not extended to them. And sometimes I wonder, is it because they are people of color and the people of Ukraine are white? We need to really check these things and make sure that our attention and our compassion widens and encompasses everybody that is in need in this place. And yes, we really need to get on board and see the interdependence of all of these issues of climate change and peace and ending nuclear weapons and having a decent, dignified life for everybody on this planet. Because when we have that, we can have the peace, we can get rid of the nuclear weapons, we'll deal with climate change. But we've got to care for everybody and not just certain segments of the world's population.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bruce. Cynthia?
Thank you again, Kikisha, and everyone here, everyone who's asked the questions and all the panelists. I really do feel that education is, that resonates very deeply with me on all levels. And I think that there are ways by storytelling, as the Day After did in the 1980s, that we need that kind of, that we need those stories to be shared of the Habakasha, of the children of Habakasha, of people who have been impacted by nuclear testing, of people who went through things like we did with the false alarm. But there are all kinds of ways of sharing stories that can make this real and personal. I think we have to make this issue personal, and we have to feel like we have a connection to it so that we can claim it to change our nuclear story on the global level. And so my prayer is, just like after the Hawaii false alarm, that this moment, that we have another chance. I had this feeling after I went through that experience of gratitude. And as horrific as everything is now, my prayer right now is that we have another chance right now to get this right. And we're still here. And every day that we're still here is a gift to do something with and to act. So my prayer is that this is an awakening, that we will come together to act out of love and not fear, to change our story and to build peace and the conditions that are necessary for peace, to eliminate nuclear weapons so that we can have the resources we need to take care of all the other existential and other threats that are in front of us right now: climate, pandemic, racial economic injustice, education. I could go on and on and on, but we can do this, but we have to come together. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Cynthia. Pragna?
Yes, thank you, Keksha. I would just like to emphasize that the most pressing issue right now is not just nuclear proliferation, but the complete abolition of nuclear weapons, and therefore how necessary it is to ensure stricter compliance and inspection and verification of the already existing treaties. And of course, the importance of disarmament education in achieving a nuclear arms-free world and bringing this issue center stage among civil society, especially the younger generations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pragna. And thank you so much to all of our panelists. Once again, this has been such an amazing discussion. And, you know, it is so sad that we are here in this virtual space discussing the threat of a nuclear war. This shouldn't have happened. And as was discussed today, there were a lot of mistakes and missteps that were made, that happened in the past. And now is really the time for us to ensure that we never make those mistakes again, that we do rebuild better into a world that is more equitable, that is more peaceful, that is more sustainable. And a common thread that really stood out from all of your remarks is that we need more compassion and empathy for everyone. And therein lies the importance of understanding how nuclear disarmament and the threat of nuclear weapons is not an isolated issue. It is very much linked to all of the other challenges that our world is facing, like the climate crisis, like racism, like sexism. So it is extremely important for us to understand that only by coming together as a common humanity and regaining a culture of empathy will we be able to ensure this complete abolition of nuclear weapons, and of course ensuring, and as civil society, holding our institutions and governments to account to make sure that there is complete abolition of nuclear weapons. So thank you so much for being with us today. I really feel that your remarks have given us a semblance of hope for the future. Thank you for being with us. Please stay safe, stay connected, take care of yourselves and your loved ones. The pandemic is still not over. And we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.